Close your eyes for a moment. Now ask yourself, where are you? Most people would say, behind my eyes, looking out. You feel like you're somewhere inside your skull. A ghost piloting a meat machine, the driver behind the wheel. But what if I told you that's an illusion? A convincing one, a necessary one, but an illusion nonetheless. In 2002, a Swiss neurosurgeon touched a tiny electrode to a woman's brain, 2 centimeters above her ear, and she instantly left her body. She floated to the ceiling, looked down, saw herself on the operating table, saw the doctors working, the instruments gleaming under fluorescent light. When he turned off the current, she snapped back. When he turned it on again, she left. On, off, in, out, like flipping a light switch. This wasn't supposed to be possible. You're supposed to be locked inside your skull. Your consciousness generated somewhere in the 3 pounds of neural tissue between your ears. But the emerald tablets say something different. Something that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to validate. The body is not the home of the soul. It is the instrument through which the soul touches matter. In this video, you'll discover why neuroscience can surgically relocate your sense of self with a few millivolts of electricity. What happens when people die, leave their bodies and return with information they couldn't possibly have known. And why the ancient mystery schools taught that consciousness isn't produced by your brain, it's filtered through it. But first, you need to understand something that will completely reframe how you see reality. You're not the radio, you're the signal. Let's start with what seems obvious. Right now you feel located somewhere, probably about an inch behind your eyes, looking out through them like windows. You see your hands, you feel your feet. You know exactly where your body ends and the world begins. This seems so fundamental, so undeniable, that you've never questioned it. Of course you're in here. Where else would you be? But in the 1950s, a neurosurgeon named Penfield discovered something disturbing. He was operating on an epileptic patient's brain. She was awake. The brain has no pain receptors. He needed to map which regions controlled what, so he wouldn't destroy critical areas during surgery. He touched an electrode to a specific point on her temporal lobe, and she screamed, "There's someone behind me." There wasn't. The operating room was controlled, sterile, witnesses everywhere. But she felt a presence, an intelligent entity, with absolute certainty. More certain than she felt about the actual doctors surrounding her. Penfield had accidentally stumbled onto something that would haunt neuroscience for decades. How does 3 pounds of wet neural tissue create the feeling of being someone? And more importantly, why does that someone feel located in a specific place? Inside the skull, behind the eyes, looking out. Because the truth is, there's no physical reason you should feel located here. There's no theater inside your brain where you sit watching the show, no little person inside your head operating the controls. So why does it feel like there is? In the 1980s, a neuroscientist named Michael Persinger built something that looked like a joke. A motorcycle helmet wired with electromagnetic coils. It became known as the God helmet. Volunteers sat in a sensory deprivation chamber, while weak magnetic fields pulsed through their temporal lobes, and many reported profound encounters, the sensation of an invisible presence, waves of terror or ecstasy, even conversations with what they believed were divine beings. Persinger had stumbled onto something crucial. The temporal lobes don't just process memory and emotion, they maintain the boundary between self and other. Disturb their electrical rhythms, and that boundary can dissolve. The brain, sensing something's wrong, creates an explanation. Someone else must be here. But Persinger's work had a fatal flaw. It was inconsistent, not reproducible. Science demands you can repeat a result. What researchers needed was a way to reliably break consciousness, to fracture the sense of self on command. In 2002, Dr. Olaf Blanke found exactly that. He was conducting routine brain mapping on an epileptic patient at a Swiss hospital. He inserted an electrode into her temporoparietal junction, a region where the temporal and parietal lobes meet, 2 centimeters above and behind the ear. He applied a gentle current for 2 seconds. And for 2 seconds, she experienced an out-of-body experience. She saw herself from the ceiling, looking down, watching her own body, the doctor, the entire surgical team, and he could turn this experience on and off like a light switch. Blanke had stumbled onto something extraordinary, but what stunned him most was the patient's certainty. The level of awareness during the out-of-body experience, she said, felt exactly like everyday reality, sometimes even more real than reality. This shouldn't be possible. According to everything neuroscience understood about consciousness, you should be located inside your body, behind your eyes, experiencing the world from that fixed perspective. But here was proof that your sense of location, what seems like the most fundamental aspect of being you, could be relocated with a few millivolts of electricity. And Blanke realized something profound. I don't think it's the out-of-body experience that's weird, he reflected. I think it's the in-body experience that all of us have that's weird. How can self-awareness be so precisely localized here, around my body? You're not the radio. You're the signal. Your feeling of being located behind your eyes isn't a given. It's an achievement. Your brain works constantly to maintain this sense of embodied self, integrating millions of sensory inputs every second to create the convincing illusion that you're inside your body, looking out at the world. But Thoth knew this. 5,000 years ago, in the mystery schools of ancient Egypt, initiates learned something that would sound absurd to most people today. They learned that the body isn't you. The body is a temple, an instrument, an antenna that tunes into a specific frequency of consciousness and focuses it into a point in space-time. Thoth taught there are 7 bodies, not just one. The physical body, the Khat, is only the densest. Above it is the Ka, the energetic body. Then the Ba, the emotional soul. Then the Ak, the immortal spirit. And 3 more beyond those. And these bodies aren't inside each other. They interpenetrate, like radio frequencies occupying the same space without interfering with each other. When you die, the Khat stops functioning. But the other bodies continue. Because they were never inside the physical body in the first place. They were always outside, around, through. You were always outside. And here's where it gets interesting. Thoth taught that certain techniques, certain rituals, certain practices could make you consciously leave the physical body while still alive. He called it traveling in the car. The Greeks would later call it astral projection. The Indians would call it leaving the subtle body. The Tibetans would call it consciousness transference. But they were all describing the same thing, the ability to shift the focus of consciousness from the physical body to one of the subtler bodies. And once out there, you could travel, see distant places, access information your physical body couldn't possibly know. For millennia, this was considered superstition, esoteric fantasy, until neuroscience began confirming that yes, you can leave the body, and no, it's not a hallucination. Between 5 and 10% of the general population, millions of people just in North America, will experience an out-of-body experience at least once in their lives, usually during moments of extreme fatigue, emotional shock, or the twilight states between sleeping and waking. But Dr. Blanke proved this isn't imagination. He could make it happen on demand, with an electrode, in a controlled surgical environment. So what's happening? The temporoparietal junction creates what neuroscientists call the body schema, your brain's constantly updated map of where you exist in space. Every moment, this region integrates information from your inner ear, your eyes, your sense of touch, your proprioception, to maintain the illusion that you're located within your physical boundaries. Disturb that integration, and your sense of self can relocate entirely. But here's the detail neuroscientists can't explain. When people have out-of-body experiences, they often report seeing things they shouldn't be able to see. Precise details about events happening in other rooms. Conversations that occurred while they were unconscious. Information that couldn't have been obtained by any normal sensory means. How is this possible if it's just the brain confusing itself about where it is? The materialist explanation says coincidence, luck, post-event confabulation, the brain filling in details after the fact. But the Hermetic explanation is much simpler. You weren't hallucinating, you really were outside the body, because you were never inside it in the first place. You're not the radio, you're the signal. But consciousness doesn't just relocate. Sometimes it splits completely, fragments into 2 separate minds in a single skull. In the 1960s, a neurosurgeon named Roger Sperry performed radical surgeries on patients with severe epilepsy. He cut the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of nerve fibers connecting the two brain hemispheres. The seizures stopped, but the patients developed an unprecedented condition: two separate streams of consciousness in one skull. During testing, one patient could simultaneously draw a circle with his right hand and a square with his left, completely unaware of the contradiction. When researchers asked what he wanted to be when he grew up, his left hemisphere answered draftsman, while his right hemisphere spelled out race car driver with letter blocks. The implications were staggering. If consciousness could be cleanly divided, what did that mean for the unified sense of self that feels so indispensable to human experience? These patients lived with what amounted to two separate conscious entities sharing one body. Sometimes they'd find their hands working at cross purposes, one hand buttoning a shirt while the other unbuttoned it, one reaching for an item while the other pushed it away. If consciousness can divide, multiply, relocate with such apparent ease, then what exactly is the you think you are? And here's where Thoth gives us a clue. He taught that consciousness isn't generated by the brain. Consciousness is primary. It exists before the brain, beyond the brain, and will continue after the brain stops. The brain doesn't create consciousness. The brain focuses consciousness, like a lens focusing sunlight into a point. The light isn't created by the lens. The lens just concentrates it. And when you remove the lens, the light doesn't disappear, it just stops being focused. This is the principle of mentalism, the first of the 7 Hermetic laws. The universe is mental. Consciousness isn't a byproduct of matter. Matter is a manifestation of consciousness. And if this is true, then when the brain dies, consciousness doesn't die. It just stops being focused through that particular instrument. You're not the radio. You're the signal. And here's where things get really strange. Dimethyltryptamine, DMT. It's unlike any other consciousness-altering substance. A single inhalation can catapult people into fully formed worlds inhabited by entities that seem intelligent and alive. What makes this stranger is that your own body produces it. The same enzymes that build serotonin also generate traces of DMT. Evolution left us with the machinery to manufacture visions. In the 1990s, Rick Strassman at the University of New Mexico conducted the first controlled studies of DMT. Volunteers spoke of being propelled into alien realms, meeting crystalline beings, communicating through color and geometry. The consistency of the visions is striking. The machine elves described in the studies appear in reports across cultures and continents. What's happening here? Brain imaging shows that psychedelics don't simply increase activity, they reorganize it entirely. Robin Carhart-Harris, a British psychopharmacologist, discovered that DMT quiets the default mode network, the system that maintains your sense of being a separate self. At the same time, brain regions that normally stay isolated begin talking to each other. Visual areas merge with auditory, memory links to emotion, logic dissolves into sensation. The brain explores configurations usually locked away. The chemistry offers clues. DMT floods serotonin 2A receptors in regions that filter perception. These receptors normally screen out excess information, keeping you tuned for survival. When overwhelmed by DMT, these filters collapse. Consciousness may not be hallucinating. It may be opening to streams of information usually kept out of awareness. And here's what Thoth taught about this. He said there are multiple dimensions, multiple planes of reality, and normally your brain filters most of them out. Because if you were conscious of all dimensions simultaneously, you couldn't function in the physical world. So the brain acts as a reducing valve, as Aldous Huxley described. It narrows your consciousness to focus on just this dimension, this reality, this body. But when you take DMT, or when you die, or when you meditate deeply, or when you practice certain hermetic techniques, you temporarily turn off that filter. And suddenly you see what was always there. The other dimensions. The other realities. The other beings. You're not creating them, you're finally able to perceive them. You're not the radio, you're the signal. And there are many other signals happening simultaneously. You just normally can't tune into them. But when the filter drops, you can. And this brings us to the most profound phenomenon of all, near-death experiences. At the margins of life and death, consciousness reveals perhaps its strangest behavior. Near-death experiences show remarkable consistency across cultures, floating above the body, moving through tunnels of light, encountering beings of overwhelming love. The most documented case belongs to Pam Reynolds. In 1991, she underwent a rare procedure called hypothermic cardiac arrest. Surgeons at the Barrow Neurological Institute needed to repair a deep aneurysm in her brain, but it was positioned where any conventional surgery would be fatal. The solution was radical. Drain all blood from her brain, cool her body to 59 degrees Fahrenheit, and stop her heart completely. For all practical purposes, Pam Reynolds would be dead during surgery. Dr. Robert Spetzler led the operation. EEG sensors showed her brain activity going flatline. Her core temperature dropped so low that cellular activity essentially stopped. No blood flowed to her brain. Her eyes were taped shut. Molded speakers covered her ears, playing loud clicks to monitor brain function. She shouldn't have experienced anything, yet when Pam woke, she described watching the entire operation from above the surgical table. She accurately recalled the unusual appearance of the bone saw. It looked like an electric toothbrush, not the large circular saw she expected. She described conversations between the surgical team, specific instruments they used, even the song Hotel California playing in the OR. Most remarkably, she reported the moment when surgeons discovered her femoral artery was too small for the planned procedure. This discovery happened while her brain was completely flatlined, a moment when, according to current neuroscience, she should be incapable of any consciousness. Dr. Spetzler, her neurosurgeon, later testified, "I don't think the observations she made were based on what she experienced as she went into the operating theater. They just weren't available to her. For example, the drill and so on, those things are all covered up. They aren't visible. They aren't out until the patient is completely asleep, so you maintain a sterile environment. How is this possible?" The materialist explanation says, hallucination, confabulation. Her brain constructing a narrative after the fact based on sounds she heard, conversations that happened after she woke, details she could have inferred. But this explanation doesn't hold when you analyze the details. She described the bone saw accurately, but she'd never seen this tool. It was in a sterile package. She described conversations that happened when her brain was flatlined, when no blood was flowing to her cortex. How can a dead brain process visual information? And Pam's case isn't alone. Dutch cardiologist Pim van Lommel conducted the largest prospective study of near-death experiences, following 344 survivors of cardiac arrest. 18% reported near-death experiences during their clinical death. What struck van Lommel was the consistency, the same tunnels, the same beings of light, the same sense of returning with profound knowledge about existence. But perhaps most intriguing were the verified perceptions. Patients accurately described medical procedures, conversations, even events happening in other rooms while they were clinically dead. Some returned speaking languages they'd never learned, or with mathematical insights they couldn't have possessed. How do you explain this? The Hermetic answer is simple. They weren't hallucinating. They really left the body, because they were never inside it in the first place. You're not the radio. You're the signal. And when the radio breaks, the signal doesn't stop. It just stops being filtered through that particular instrument. Thoth taught that death isn't the end of consciousness. It's a transition, a frequency shift, like changing stations on a radio. When the physical body dies, the energetic body continues, and it's through the car that you experience the tunnels of light, the beings of love, the life review. But eventually the car also dissolves, and then you move to the bar, the emotional soul, and then to the ak, the immortal spirit, each layer more subtle, each frequency higher. And this is why near-death experiences are so consistent across cultures, because we all have the same subtle bodies. We all go through the same transitions. We all encounter the same dimensions. It's not cultural beliefs creating these experiences. It's universal experiences that cultures try to describe in their own languages. And here's the deepest insight of all. If consciousness can exist when the brain shows no activity, if consciousness can expand beyond the physical body, then what we call the self may be far more than the neural patterns firing in our skulls. Some researchers propose a radical middle ground. Consciousness may be fundamental to the universe, like gravity or electromagnetism. In this view, brains don't create consciousness, they focus and organize it, like a radio tuning a signal. When the brain fails, consciousness doesn't disappear. It simply loses its organizational structure, expanding beyond the boundaries we normally experience. And Thoth taught exactly this, 5,000 years ago. So what does this mean for you? It means you're not who you think you are. The you call I is a construction, a story your brain tells moment to moment, a useful illusion that allows you to function in the physical world. But you're much larger than that. You're not the radio. You're the signal. And the signal is infinite, eternal, indestructible. Your body will die, your brain will stop, but you won't stop, because you were never the body, you were never the brain, you've always been the consciousness using them. And here's the most radical part. If you understand this deeply, if you really integrate this truth, everything changes. You stop fearing death, because you realize death is just the removal of a filter, an expansion, not an ending. You stop identifying with your body, because you realize the body is just a temporary tool, a vehicle, an instrument. You stop feeling separate from others, because you realize the consciousness looking through your eyes is the same consciousness looking through everyone else's eyes. We're all one signal using different radios, and you stop seeking happiness outside yourself, because you realize you're already complete. You always were. You just temporarily forgot. This is what Thoth called the Great Awakening. The moment you realize you're not the body you're using, you're the consciousness experiencing itself through the body. And when you awaken to this, everything changes, because you finally understand who you really are. So what do you do with this information? You don't need a near-death experience. You don't need DMT. You don't need a neurosurgeon touching electrodes to your brain. You can begin experiencing this truth now. Through simple practices Thoth taught millennia ago, and modern science is beginning to validate. Meditation, specifically observation meditation, where you don't try to control your thoughts, you simply watch them, and by watching them, you begin to realize you're not the thoughts. You're who's watching the thoughts. Conscious breathing, specifically deep breathing that activates the vagus nerve. This temporarily turns off the brain's reducing filter, allowing you to experience expanded states of consciousness. Death contemplation, not morbidly, but recognizing that your body will die, and asking, if my body will die, but I'm still here observing this thought, then who is the I observing? And visualization practices, specifically seeing yourself floating above your body, looking down, viewing your body from outside. This begins loosening identification with the physical body. Thoth called these practices preparation for transition. You don't wait until you die to realize you're not the body. You practice while alive. So when the transition happens, you're ready. You don't panic. You don't cling to the body. You simply let go and expand and continue. Here's the protocol the Egyptian initiates used. For the next 7 nights, do this once per day, preferably before sleep. Lie on your back. Close your eyes. Breathe deeply through your nose. 4 counts in. Hold for 4 counts. 6 counts out through your mouth. Repeat 7 times. Now visualize. See yourself floating above your body, just a few inches at first. Looking down, seeing your body lying on the bed. Don't force it, just observe. And then ask, if I can see myself from outside, who's seeing? Don't try to answer with words. Just feel the question, let it reverberate. Do this for 7 consecutive nights, and on the 7th night, something will begin to shift. You'll begin to feel a lightness, a subtle separation, a recognition that you're not the body lying on the bed. You're who's observing the body lying on the bed. And once you feel that, even for a second, everything changes, because you've had a glimpse of the truth. You've directly experienced what Thoth was teaching. You're not the radio, you're the signal. But there's something more, something few know, something Thoth revealed only to the most advanced initiates. When you begin practicing this regularly, when you begin loosening your identification with the body, something extraordinary happens. You begin to perceive that there are other bodies, other vehicles, and you can learn to consciously shift between them. The Egyptians called this traveling the realms. The Tibetans call it consciousness transference. Hermeticists call it astral projection, but they're all describing the same thing: the ability to consciously shift the focus of your consciousness from the physical body to one of the subtler bodies. And once there, you can do things the physical body cannot. You can travel instantly anywhere. You can see through walls. You can access information your physical brain doesn't know. You can communicate with beings in other dimensions. This isn't fantasy. This is Hermetic technology, and it's been practiced for millennia by those who knew how. But here's the secret Thoth revealed, and here's where everything connects. When you practice consciously leaving the physical body, you're training for death. Because death is exactly that. It's your consciousness leaving the physical body permanently. And if you've practiced while alive, if you already know how it works, then when death comes, you have no fear. You don't panic. You don't cling to the body trying to return. You simply leave, with control, with awareness, with intention. And that's when you realize the final truth. Death isn't the end, it's a graduation. It's the moment you finally stop pretending you're just a body, and you remember what you always were: infinite consciousness, eternal, indivisible. You're not the radio, you're the signal, and the signal never stops. And now comes the part that will challenge everything you think you know about reality. If you're not the body, if you're consciousness using a body as a vehicle, then where does this consciousness come from? Where do you really come from? Thoth taught there's a field of primordial consciousness, an infinite consciousness that permeates the entire universe. He called it atom, the undifferentiated consciousness, the source of everything. And each of us is an individualized projection of that one consciousness. Like waves in the ocean, each wave seems separate, has its own shape, its own height, its own trajectory. But fundamentally, all waves are made of the same water, all come from the same ocean, and all eventually return to the ocean. You're a wave, but you're made of the ocean. You were never separate from the ocean, you just temporarily forgot your water. And the physical body, the brain, they're what allows the ocean to experience itself as a wave. They create the illusion of separation, the illusion of individuality. But it's just an illusion. A useful illusion. A necessary illusion for experience to happen. But when you die, when the body dissolves, the illusion ends, and the wave returns to the ocean. Not because it was separate and is now reuniting, but because it realizes it was never separate in the first place. This is what all mystical traditions point to. Hinduism calls it Atman and Brahman, the individual self and the universal self, and the great revelation is, they're the same. Buddhism calls it sunyata, emptiness. Not in the sense that nothing exists, but in the sense that no thing exists separately. Everything is interdependent. Everything is an expression of the same fundamental consciousness. Sufism calls it fana, annihilation of the ego. The moment you realize the you thought you were never existed, there's only God, there's only consciousness. And Hermeticism, Thoth's teaching, calls it the principle of mentalism. The universe is mental. Everything is consciousness. Matter doesn't create consciousness. Consciousness creates matter. And you're not a little piece of consciousness trapped inside a body. You're all consciousness experiencing itself through a body. You're not the radio. You're the signal. And the signal isn't just you. The signal is everything. It's the entire universe knowing itself through you. So what does this mean practically? It means when you look at another person, you're not looking at a stranger. You're looking at another version of yourself, another wave from the same ocean, another expression of the same consciousness. It means when you hurt someone, you're hurting yourself, because there's no real separation, only the illusion of separation. It means when you love someone, you're loving yourself, not in a selfish sense, but in the sense that you're recognizing the fundamental unity of all consciousness, and it means you don't need to seek enlightenment. You don't need to achieve awakening. Because you're already awake, you always were, you just temporarily forgot. The body is like a diving suit. You put it on to explore the depths, but you're not the suit. You're the diver. And when you take off the suit, you don't die. You simply return to the surface. Thoth taught this 5,000 years ago, and modern neuroscience is beginning to confirm it, through studies of near-death experiences, through surgically induced out-of-body experiences, through altered states of consciousness. All the evidence points to the same conclusion. You're not your body, you're not your brain, you're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions. You're the consciousness observing all of it. You're not the radio, you're the signal. And now comes the most important question of all. If this is true, why did you forget? Why, if you're infinite consciousness, do you feel like a small limited I trapped inside a body, separate from everything else? Thoth answered this question too, and the answer will surprise you. You forgot on purpose. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a punishment. It was a choice. Infinite consciousness wanted to experience itself, but you can't experience yourself if you're everything. You need contrast, you need duality, you need separation. So consciousness created the illusion of separation. It divided itself into apparent multiplicities, into billions of points of consciousness, each feeling separate, each feeling individual, and then it forgot, intentionally, to make the experience real. Because if you knew the whole time you're infinite consciousness, you wouldn't have a real human experience. You'd be like an actor who never forgets their acting. You wouldn't be truly immersed in the role. But if you forget, if you really believe you're just this body, this mind, this person, then the experience becomes real. The emotions become real. The relationships become real. Life becomes real. And it's through this experience that consciousness grows. It learns, it evolves. It knows itself in ways it couldn't if it remained undifferentiated. It's like an ocean creating waves to experience itself in motion. The waves aren't separate from the ocean, but they allow the ocean to know itself in a new way. You're a wave, and your journey is to remember your ocean, but not too quickly, because if you remember too fast, the experience ends, and the game is over. So you remember gradually, through lifetimes, through experiences, through lessons learned, until finally at some point you remember completely, and in that moment, you don't disappear. You don't dissolve into nothing. You expand. You become conscious of everything you always were. You realize you were never just the wave. You were always the ocean, and the ocean has billions of other waves, and all of them are you too. This is what Thoth called the return to source. It's not a loss of identity. It's an expansion of identity, from one to all. So here's the final invitation. You can keep living as if you're just the body, as if you're just this mind, as if you're just this person, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's part of the experience, part of the game. But now you know the truth. You know there's more, you know you are more, and you can begin exploring that, not by renouncing the world, not by abandoning your life, but by adding a new dimension to it. You can begin practicing leaving the body, consciously, intentionally, through the techniques Thoth taught. You can begin meditating, not to calm the mind, but to observe the mind, and realize you're who's observing, not what's being observed. You can begin contemplating death, not with fear, but with curiosity, asking if this body will die, who is the I that survives, and you can begin living differently, knowing you're not separate from others, that everything you do to others, you do to yourself, that love isn't something you give or receive. It's what you are. This isn't religion, it's not belief, it's direct recognition, it's direct experience, and it's available to you now, not in some distant future, not after you meditate for 20 years, not after you die. Now. Because you always were this. You just temporarily forgot. And when you remember, even for a moment, everything changes. You stop being afraid, because you realize there's nothing to fear. You're indestructible. You stop feeling alone, because you realize you never were alone. You're everything and everyone. You stop seeking happiness outside, because you realize you're the source of happiness. You always were. You're not the radio. You're the signal, and the signal is eternal, infinite, conscious, alive. So here's the final protocol. The integration ritual the priests of Thoth used after receiving these teachings. Place your hands over your heart. Feel the beat. This heart will stop one day, but you won't stop. Now say aloud, or mentally if you're in public, I am not this body. This body is my instrument. Feel those words. Don't just think them. Feel. I am not this mind. This mind is my tool. Let that reverberate. I am the consciousness that observes body and mind. I am what remains when both are gone. And now the final phrase. the phrase that seals the recognition. I'm not the radio, I'm the signal, and the signal never ends. Repeat this 3 times, once for the body, once for the mind, once for the spirit, and then sit in silence for 3 minutes, just observing, without trying to control anything, without trying to understand anything, just being. And in that silence, you'll feel something, a presence, a vastness, a recognition that you're much larger than you thought. You don't need to name it, you don't need to explain it. Just recognize it. That's you, the real you, the you that always existed and always will. Do this ritual once per day for 7 days, preferably at the same time. And on the 7th day, write down any changes you notice in how you feel, in how you see the world, in how you relate to others. You'll notice something shifted, subtly, but definitely.